alone in a foreign country, very ill, broken down vehicle, a 43-year motorcycle journey, Parkinson's disease, and more. All this in this episode of the podcast right now.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.
Hello, my remarkable friend. I'm David Pasqualone, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the Remarkable People Podcast. This episode's slightly different than our normal show. As you noticed, it's more condensed, and it briefly touches points in the guest's life. It's the end of season 7, the last episode of season 7. Can you believe this? 3 years, 7 seasons we've been together. Whether this is your first episode, whether you've serial binge watched the show and listened, or whether you've been with us since week 1, day 1, thank you. We love you. Our whole purpose of this podcast is to glorify God and to help you grow, to sharpen one another and become better humans. So our slogan says, listen, do, repeat. For life, we mean it. In this episode, our guest today is going to talk about how he went through a journey to go continent to continent on his motorcycle, and how he goes the wrong direction, and you'll see what that means. He's going to talk about how he was stuck in third world countries during civil unrest and war, and how he was alone and learned to be self-reliant, and how to motivate himself and to move through it, and how he didn't finish a journey 43 years ago. Yet even with Parkinson's today, he talks about just doing it and finishing what we start. So we hope in this episode and all the other 150 plus episodes of our podcast to date, you get huge value, that you can not just hear what our guests were able to overcome and achieve in life, but take the practical steps that they break down of how they did it, so you and I can too. Run with it. Share it with your friends and family. Let us know how it's impacted your life in a positive way, and if we can help you. So at this time, today's guest is an adventurer, a businessman, an entrepreneur, a motorcycle enthusiast, a world traveler. And as you can see, he's going to talk to us about just doing it, so to speak, right? Art Williams, just do it. Some people think it's Nike, but it was Art Williams. So at this time, please enjoy our friend, Chris Donaldson. Hey, Chris, how are you today, brother?
I'm great, David. How are you?
Man, I'm fantastic. Today, it's Memorial Day in the States. And where are you coming to us from?
I'm ringing from Belfast, Northern Ireland.
Nice, nice. So you and I had the pleasure to meet probably a few months ago now and talk on the phone. And today we're finally getting to record your episode. I just told our listeners in the introduction a little bit about you and your story, and they are pumped. But as they're listening to your story, you know, we have some listeners who are first time. We have some listeners who've been with us for 3 years and 150 plus episodes. But if they were going to get one thought, one truth, one actionable step from this episode, what is it that you want them to walk away with today?
I guess the belief that if they want to do something, they can do it. They go and do it. Don't worry about the ifs and the whys and the wherefores. Just go and do it. Stop talking about it. Just go and do it.
Talk's cheap, right? All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great lesson that most of us need. So let's talk about this. We go through our guest's life chronologically. It's called the Remarkable People Podcast, and we discuss what's remarkable about their lives. So you don't have to bring in every detail, but starting, where were you born? What was your home life? Brothers, sisters, cousins, mom and dad in the home, adopted, orphanage, whatever it is. Where did your life start, Chris?
Well, basically started 65 years ago. I'm not officially a pensioner, I think. Born in 58. So 50s child, born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Things were pretty uneventful in the family. We're some middle-class family, four of us, four kids. But Belfast was a pretty peculiar place in those days, certainly in the 70s and 80s, in the 60s. Troubles kicked off the end of the 60s. So basically, it's all we knew when we were kids is bombs going off, bullets flying, and security forces running around the place. And while it never affected terribly much. In fact, we were living in a relatively nice part of Belfast. There was pretty obvious there was a civil war going on of sorts. We could see bombs going off outside the school windows. The parents' the furniture shop got blown up more times than I can remember. So it wasn't too long before I was in teenage years. I thought there must be places in the world that you don't have to put up with this sort of nonsense.
Now, did you feel like it was safe because you were so used to it, or were you under constant fear?
No, I felt they were safe enough because I think safety is a relative feeling, I guess. I mean, there's certainly times that you were under stress, under fear, if you got caught out in a situation you weren't happy with, the wrong side of town or whatever. But it certainly taught me how to look after myself, how to get out of situations that you maybe didn't want to be in, more than the average Joe, probably, you know. But certainly I got to the age of 16 odd. I wanted to get out of Northern Ireland and see the rest of the world. And I thought Australia was the best place to go to because I was a keen motorcyclist and I didn't want to just fly out there. I wanted to ride a motorbike to Australia from the UK, from Belfast. I probably didn't realize it at the time, but I think I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to, when you're growing up, you're under the influence of your parents and then your school and your friends and your family and your basically society that you're growing up in. And I wanted to get away from that and travel on my own and challenge myself. I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I just thought I wanted to ride my motorbike. But thinking back now, I sort of realized that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to push myself as well as to skip to Australia. So I left home in 79, October 79. I got to London, got the visas and my guidebooks and my maps and so on for riding across Asia. And then the Ayatollah Khomeini took over the American embassy in Tehran and the Islamic Revolution kicked off and basically, amongst other things, stopped my plans to ride east. And she left me in London thinking, well, I can't go home. I've told them my friends won't be back for a year and I can't come back next week and be too embarrassing to behold. So I decided to go to South Africa just for the sake of getting away. Of course, the problem was I didn't have a clue about anything in Africa. I'd been studying the road east for the last couple of years. This is pre-internet, so everything was by books. So I was already on the road. So I ended up arriving in Africa after going through Israel and Syria and Jordan, the Middle East, without a notion of what was ahead of me.
And what year was this right now?
This is now 1980, beginning of 1980, I arrived in Africa.
So even everywhere you're going is kind of in uproar and civil war and revolution, correct?
Yeah, Africa was pretty messy at that stage. I went through Sudan, across the desert, into Uganda just after Idi Amin got kicked out. It was pretty hairy. I went through Rhodesia just as it was being changed to Zimbabwe. So it was convoy system to travel. There was terrorist attacks on various vehicles into there as well. South Africa was in the middle of apartheid, so it was not a great place to get out of as well. But I made it down, trials and tribulations, and I got a job on a yacht. I raced, got back to Europe. Took 5 weeks to sail back on a sailing boat. And part of the deal was I got the bike shipped to the States. So I ended up arriving in Los Angeles, drove up to Canada, across Canada, drove south, ended up in North Carolina for a few months, working to try and replenish the coffers, and down to Florida, went past your way, and decided to go to South America. So down through Panama and eventually ended up in Bolivia, caught hepatitis and ran out of money. The motorbike was in its last legs and managed to get a few quid to get myself home, and that was it. A year and a half later, I was back in Belfast after ending up in Argentina. I left to go to Australia and I ended up in Argentina. So I started writing a book. I thought nobody's ever done this before. But halfway through the book, I realized somebody brought me a book. Some guy called Ted Simon, who was an author and a journalist, had written a book just on the trip a couple of years before me. So I gave up my writing and got on with normal life. Got into business, some furniture business, property, fitness industry. I was in mobile apps in Dubai recently. And then fast forward 40 years, brought up a family, still got a young 15-year-old daughter, but decided to finish writing this book, and 3 years ago launched it in Amazon. The book's called Going the Wrong Way, because obviously I left to go to Australia and ended up everywhere else but Australia.
And it chronicles your journeys along the way.
And it chronicles the journey along the way, as you say, yeah. And it sort of realized at that stage when I was writing the book, it was interesting to sort of read my notes from that I'd written when I was 21 at the age of 60 odd. At the sort of end of my working life, what I realized was the whole journey was a sort of coming of age journey as such, because it was that sort of juncture between boyhood and manhood, the start of my working life, start of family life, and so on. So it was an interesting time to look back on, to reflect. And I realized it was a coming of age, and I started to realize how a lot of the things that had happened to me on that journey had impacted me through my life, and how it helped me, and how the journey had shaped my personality, in fact, and how it helped me in business and my personal life as well. So,
and talk about that. How did it help you? This show is all about not just what you learned, but we break it down to the practical steps so our listeners can too, or they can at least get a catalyst in overcoming that adversity or achieving that success. So when you were taking these journeys and over 65 years of life, what are some of the lessons that you really learned from this?
Well, when you're traveling on your own, you've only got yourself to get yourself into bother and yourself to get yourself out of bother again. So you really become very self-reliant, and you realize that there's nobody else to help you. I think in the Western world, we're very much brought up to be, there's always somebody for health-wise, if you get sick, there's somebody to look after you. If you run out of money, you can go to the bank, or your parents or your friends. It's always a backup. Whereas if you're on your own on a motorbike in the third world especially, you've only got yourself to look after yourself. So it taught me to be quite self-reliant, I think. But, I mean, 10 years ago, my property business collapsed. The banks, after the property crash, the banks took over my business, put me into receivership, and I ended up basically bankrupt, no money and no job. But I was able to self-litigate against the banks, take them to court, and get my business back again. I'd broken a lot of rules and laws and whatever. Long story short, I ended up getting my properties back. I remember halfway through the process of trying to learn from being a businessman to being a lawyer, standing up in courts in front of these highbrow barristers and lawyers to argue your case. I realized it's sort of driving across the desert it seems like an insurmountable problem that you've got to achieve, but I realized that crossing a desert, you just have to do it bit by bit and day by day and hour by hour, and if you do that, you'll get what you want if you keep going, if you've got the stamina and the motivation to keep going. So I was able to bring, 40 years before that, it took me a week to cross a desert of sort of 400 miles, driving every day. Some days would cover 10 miles, some days would cover 100 miles. But, I realized that self-motivation and the self-belief that you can get there in the end is a very strong lesson to learn. I've been able to use that in my life.
So how do you, I'm sorry, there's a delay in our connection. I apologize.
Either that or I'm just a stubborn git that I won't be able to do what I'm not told to do,
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. So everybody's born with a certain skill set, gifts, disposition. just how God creates us. And then we develop and grow on top of that. And that's his plan. So some people have that grit and determination from the womb. Most don't, though. So, what are the things, your thought process, your mentality, what kept you going when you're in the road and you're like, man, I'm screwed. Like I got no money. My bike's broken down. I think you said you were in South America. You got gonorrhea. You're like, this could be it. Or are you thinking, how am I going to get out of this? Like, what's your thought process like on opposition and challenges?
Well, when you're somewhere like South America or South Africa, you're very much back to basics. You're back in survival mode. You're in the West. We got a hard time whenever you no money in your bank account, or your wages haven't come in yet, or very often the problems we have are really not that bad. Well, they seem bad on the day, but I think it's traveling to some of these places. It's resetting your badness calendar. In the likes of Africa, when you're down traveling, you see people are thirsty, hungry. Or I don't think anybody in the West, generally, you never actually get proper thirsty. That your throat's dry and you can't speak because you can't get the moisture in your mouth. You're hungry. That you're at the bottom of the pile, society wise. That you've really got nobody else but yourself to get yourself out of a situation. So I think it was good to get a reset just of my how bad is life. I mean, came from Northern Ireland, which was a bit of a war zone going on, but really compared to other war situations, it wasn't that bad at all. So I think in the West we do get carried away with our disillusionment with what's our life is like. We're really much better off. Most people are much better off than we think we are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think most of us are ungrateful, unthankful, and that's why we have most of our problems on top of it, right?
Yeah.
So when you start off this episode and you're like, man, you just gotta forgive me if I use the wrong terms, but basically just do it. Just take that risk. How did you phrase it when we started the episode?
Don't think about it, just do it.
Yeah. So when you're making decisions or looking at opportunities, whether it's personal or professional, I'm sure there is some form of calculations, but when you get to the point you want to make a decision, what do you recommend for our listeners to make a decision and to stick to that decision?
Well, I called a book the road going the wrong way because, as I say, directionally wise, navigation wise, I ended up in the wrong continent. But I realized when I was writing the book that it's actually followed me through my own life. Is very often taking the wrong route. We're very often the easiest route to solve a problem or to make a journey is the quickest and easiest way. But if you go the wrong way, the road less traveled, whichever way you want to put it, you can have a lot more fun, a lot more of a challenge. And life, to me, is full of challenges rather than challenges and memories, rather than objects and projects and ownership of things. Life's about learning and challenging yourself. I think you can do that more often by going the route that isn't taken very often, more difficult route. You can make a normal day into an exciting day by whatever, cycling to work instead of taking the bus, whatever it is you want to do, just make it fun, make it a memorable occasion.
Now, do you have a wife, kids? What's your family like?
Yeah, I have a wife and two kids. So, yeah, I mean, after we did published the book, one of my mates said to me, well, you never actually got to Australia, why not have another go at it? I thought, well, I can't sell very well when you're 21, you can take off for a year and a half, but I realized, well, I could actually do it because if I ride for 2 weeks and then park up somewhere and come home and work for 2 months, 3 months, and then go back out again and ride another 2 weeks and do bit by bit, I'll be able to cross half the world like that, get to Australia over a period of different stages. So we decided to do that. And say a very understanding wife who was able to let me to do that, and I work for myself. So the beauty about the internet age is you can be sitting in a rice paddy in India and be working away on a computer, and nobody knows where you are, and still keep your business running. But
That's beautiful, isn't it? As long as we have
yeah,
electricity and a cell connection, we can do almost anything.
it is amazing, you know. So yeah, so a year and a half I set off for Australia. Luckily, I still had the same Moto Guzzi Le Mans, the same motorcycle that I made the first trip on. I kept it as a souvenir.
Nice.
So I set off on the same bike. So it's the same person on the same bike setting off on the same journey again, only 45 years later. So the bike and myself had a combined age of 109 when we set off. So the bike should have been in a museum, and I should have been in an old folks home probably, but we were setting off across the world. So I finally made it in last March, a couple of months ago. I got to Sydney, Australia, 43 years after I set off in 1979. So the guys have got a great reception. Probably the slowest sort of journey anybody's ever made to Australia.
Hey man, congratulations though. You finished what you started. How did that make you feel? I mean, that's an accomplishment, whether it's 43 years later or 43 weeks later or 43 days later. How did you feel
Yeah.
when that was over?
Well, it felt great in a way because I finally achieved what I set out to do, but I've always found it reaching a destination on a journey like that is always a bit disappointing. Not so much disappointing, but disillusioning. Because the reason you go on a journey like that is not to get to the destination. If you want to get to the destination, you can fly there or whatever you want to go there. But the reason you make a journey like that is for the journey. It's for the day, every day of the journey. So by the time you get to the destination, that's the death of the journey. It's finished. It's all over. So it's nearly disappointing when you get there because that's the end of the trip. You know, all you can do then is plan your next journey. But no, it was great. I got a great welcome from the Australians, and it was great to be there. Slightly different. If I got there when I was 21, sort of realization hit me that if I got there when I was 21, I probably would have stayed there. Maybe would have ended up speaking with an Australian accent instead of a Northern Ireland accent. But and then you start thinking back, well, what happened? It was actually the Iranian Revolution that stopped me, and it's amazing how something completely unconnected to your life and to you ends up making a huge difference to the outcome of the last 40 years, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And everything, that's what we talk about. Everything outside of our control, everything within our control, it all works together. And, the Bible says in Romans, like all things work together for good to them that love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So between your birth, Chris, and today, is there anything else that we didn't cover in your story that you want to touch on before we transition to where is Chris today and where's he headed next? Where's the next destination, but the journey he'll enjoy?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot of it. I've done lots of bits and pieces in between. I've built airplanes, I've run several businesses. I've done various travels around the world, but I suppose the other big occasion which has made a big difference in my life recently was the publishing the book. I was never very good at school, never academic and intellectual in any way. Scraped my way through university, through college, and always tumbling along the bottom of the class. So if I can write a book, literally anybody can write a book. And they say everybody's got a book in them, a story to tell. But certainly if the internet's made things easier these days because you've got spell check for start, which you could never have written a book without that. But even self-publishing and with Amazon, anybody can get a book published now. Before you used to have to get a publisher and the whole traditional route to go down. Whereas now I can publish a book anywhere in America or it's available all over the world. So it's quite tremendous how that's affected that industry.
Yeah, congratulations. Writing and releasing a book's a huge deal and quite the, accomplishment. So where can listeners reach out and grab your book and read more about your adventures, Chris?
Well, that's through the company we all love to hate, in it. That's on Amazon, the company we can't do without.
And if you're an author, Chris and I were making that joke, but I know exactly what he's talking about. Amazon, they have their KDP authors, right? And they
Yeah,
have their
yeah,
Amazon affiliates. But I have personal suspicions that they screw people on a regular basis very badly. But it's also a great way to get your book out to the masses. So that is awesome that we as listeners all over the world can reach out and grab your book.
yeah.
And it's called Going the Wrong Way by Chris Donaldson. So if you want to search on Amazon, your country, is it worldwide, Chris, or just in
It's
particular
worldwide, yeah.
geographics?
No, it's worldwide. It's the biggest sales are in the States, funny enough, the UK and Australia. So it's worldwide selling of sales. It's as you say, it's quite incredible that you can sell a book anywhere in the world now. It's print on demand. They print up 3 or 4 books at a time, and they ship them anywhere in the world. It's quite unbelievable.
Yeah, it's
But
amazing the technology.
the only problem is that they're putting the wee guy out of business. It's such a big company now that they're taking over the retail sales. I think they sell 40% of the books in the world now, or something like that. So it's quite incredible.
Yeah, yes. And I think Amazon, they still have a squeaky clean image, but I think they do a lot of corrupt stuff behind closed doors. So I'm a little biased. Yeah.
You get banned.
Yeah,
You get
yeah.
cancelled or whatever.
It's crazy. But anyways, going back to your story, when it comes to people listening now, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? We know how to grab the book, but if they want to reach out to you, ask questions, continue the conversation, what's the best way for them to connect?
Well, my website is chrisdonaldson.world, and that's got my email address, my phone number, everything's there. I'm not quite open about contacting people or people contacting me. I've had some tremendous reviews. People have contacted me that find that the story has touched them in different ways. A lot of the time, generally people my age. I suppose looking back over the last 40 years, it's you get a little bit sentimental about when you reach 65. It's the break of another age. Coming of age is whenever you're between 20 and sort of childhood and adulthood, if you like. Then you've got 40 years of work and earning a living, bringing your family up, responsibility. And when you hit 65, you're sort of at the end of that, and you're looking forward to having some time, some money, and some enjoyment of life without the responsibilities. So a lot of people in that sort of situation coming back to me and contacting me.
And what advice do you have? There's other people, so you got to go on these journeys and enjoy them, not just get to the destination. And so many people have started companies and they've taken journeys and they've got into relationships and they were so focused on the destination, they missed the journey. Now they're 55, 65, 25, doesn't matter. But let's just say people in their 60s right now, they're listening and they're like, man, it's too late for me. I don't believe it's too late. I don't think you believe it's too late. So what message do you have for the people who have missed their journey so far, but they can still go after it, right?
Yeah, I mean, today's the first day of the rest of your life, I mean, the fact I was able to ride halfway around the world at the age of 63, 64, do something that I was trying to do when I was 21 on the same motorcycle. So effectively 40 years wear and tear in a motorcycle and 40 years wear and tear in myself. But you can still do what you want to do. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, I got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which has affected me slightly as I get older. And I suppose one of the reasons I wanted to do the Australia trip was to challenge myself, to push myself to conquer that as well if I can. Whereas you can't conquer everything, you can try and control it and get it to be subject to your needs rather than be the servant of the disease or your circumstance. So, it's never too late to get out and do it.
Nice. Now, Parkinson's disease, that is a very, very impactful condition. And to ride a motorcycle with that, did you ever have any issues, or has it not progressed that far yet?
It hasn't progressed that far. It's been so far I've been looking, it's been pretty dormant or slow. And I think actually the concentration of riding a motorbike is actually quite beneficial to it. If you give in to any of these diseases or conditions, I think you're letting it take control. But if you're using your brain and your body as a tool, you should be able to, you can keep these things in the background as much as possible. As I say, if you don't use it, you lose it. And if you don't use your brain, use your body, you'll soon not be able to. I mean, one of the other things I suppose I've noticed, I've got a lot of friends and know a lot of people going into retirement. And you find that people who run a business, running large corporations, go from being sort of high stressful lives to next day they're sitting in the garden, digging in the garden and playing golf twice a week. So I thought there's got to be more to life than that, more to retirement than that. There's nothing to say that you can't do what you did when you were 21, at the age of 65.
Sweet. Well, thank you for your time today, Chris. And for myself, for the listeners, if you were talking to if you could go back and talk to the 18-year-old Chris, is there any passing or final comments you want to leave with us?
No, just tell people that I think these days with so much health and safety beaten into us, people are so risk adverse. Sometimes I think people need to just take a risk and go for it, but just don't come back at me and give off if you get into trouble.
No, if they do it, it's up to them. Me too. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Chris. It's been great spending this hour together. Ladies and gentlemen, like our slogan says, don't just listen to the great content and story of our guests, but do it. Repeat it each day so you can have a great life in this world, but most importantly for eternity to come. And like Chris just talked about, don't just focus on the destination. In the Bible, you got Mary and Martha with Jesus. My New England just came out. But Mary and Martha with Jesus, and Martha was focused on the end game, the destination, getting the chores done, getting the tasks done. But Mary was there just enjoying the journey with the Lord. And there's got to be a balance, but make sure you find that balance and don't just suck your life dry of the joy because you're so focused on the final end game. So that's it. Chris, it was a pleasure having you here today, my friend.
Good talking, David. That's so dear.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, like, comment, share, subscribe. You know what to do on the podcast and YouTube. Tell your friends about us. So hopefully this episode not just inspires you, but inspires them too. Check out Chris's book on the infamous Amazon.com. And then go ahead and check out our next episode. We love you. Have a great day. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.